Okay, welcome guys and gals and everybody tuning in and our great panelists that we have here for this forum on mental health and our criminal justice system. And the end result of what we are going to achieve today, I am certain because we have such an esteemed list of panelists, is that we will ultimately be establishing in New Jersey a criminal justice system that includes courts designed to treat offenders who have mental health issues. And we're way behind other states, and we want to get this through legislation. And we have a lot of people who have been promoting this, and this is going to be the vanguard, the kickoff. And I will guarantee you within a year from now, with all these folks behind us, we're going to get something done in the state of New Jersey. So it's my honor to welcome President Lamont Rapollet, the former Commissioner of the Department of Education, Dr. and President Rapollet.
Thank you, Senator Lesniak, for the introduction and for inviting King University to partner with the Lesniak Institute for American Leadership for this event.
There you go.
Good evening to those of you who are with us in person, as well as those who are watching us via live stream. I am grateful for the opportunity to welcome you to King University and to kick off this critical conversation and subsequent action addressing the connection between our criminal justice system and individuals living with mental illness. Yes, there is a connection, one that is not often reported in the news, seen on popular TV shows, or even spoken of in public. There is much more to the story, and that is why we're hosting this forum here today at King University. We are here this evening because we want action. It is something I believe in firmly, and as a pillar of my administration at King University, equity in action. Tonight's forum is about the decriminalization of mental illness, about people who are thrown in jail for nonviolent and misdemeanor crimes, who would be better served by proper diagnosis and treatment. It's about a major public health crisis in this country that requires focused attention and dedicated criminal justice and mental health policy reform. We're talking about the millions of people in America, 1 in 10 according to NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, who are struggling with their mental health. And isolation brought on by the pandemic has only served to make matters worse. Those statistics are disproportionately higher for those in marginalized populations, including Black and brown communities, whereas racism and culture factor into who does and doesn't seek and receive treatment, and who gets in prison. Of those, only about half are diagnosed or treated, others go unchecked or simply ignored. Yet, like the variety of other acute and chronic conditions that many of us experience, mental illness is treatable through medication and therapy. And like so many of those other health issues, improper diagnosis and appropriate treatment for mental illness often results in better outcomes. That is the reality. So in the criminal justice system, we must diagnose and treat people who have committed nonviolent or misdemeanor crimes instead of throwing them in jail. If we did that, do you know what we would get? A decrease in mass incarceration, less crowding in prisons and jails, and lower recidivism rates. That should be a shared goal for all of us this evening. But why can't we get there now? One reason is that access to treatment and mental health facilities is sorely lacking, in part because of the funding to support it has been invested in other places. Inadequate criminal justice and mental health policies haven't been put in place. Think about it. What if you were put in jail because you were diagnosed with a heart condition or diabetes and couldn't get your medication? That's essentially what is happening to people who are living with mental health and other disabilities across the country who have committed nonviolent or misdemeanor crimes. Seems pretty absurd, right? So what do we do about it? Remember I said I believe in equity in action. When it comes to people with mental health difficulties, it's a matter of taking a justice-centered approach versus a punitive one. Here in New Jersey, specifically Union and Mercer counties, there's an informal mental health court program to address nonviolent cases involving people with mental illness. It's a start, but we need that approach to become the norm. Why? Because it makes sense. I look forward to discussion tonight, and most importantly, to setting our advocacy in motion. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, President Repollet, and thank you, Kane University, for partnering with the Lesniak Institute for this very, very important forum. And now it's an honor for me to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Christine Montrose. And I don't know that she knows this, but she's the reason why we're having this forum. I heard you on the Smirkanish radio show. I was very impressed. I got your book. I was even more impressed, and I said, we have to do something about this. So I introduce to you Dr. Christine Montrose.
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you, President, for hosting this event. I'm grateful for it. Am I coming through loud and clear? Yes? Okay. More. I'm getting...
You want to use this?
Yeah, maybe I'll... Okay.
Sure. Stand
Great.
up. You
Okay,
can stand
terrific. Hi, good evening. Okay, that's better, I think.
Hold it closer, though.
Thank you. Very happy to be here tonight. This is a joy and a privilege to be in person at an event like this. Rare to do so today, so I'm grateful for those of you who have come out in this time and gathered together for such an important topic. I'm an inpatient psychiatrist. I work in a freestanding psychiatric hospital in Providence, Rhode Island. I work on the intensive treatment units there. They're the psychiatric version of the ICU. So the patients who I treat are struggling with acute episodes of severe mental illness. They're hearing voices or seeing visions. They're maybe manic, or they're actively trying to hurt themselves or other people. And so the patients that I see are really in moments of crisis. I've held that position for about 10 years now. And over the course of my practice, I really was struck by how often my patients would come in contact with police or serve time in our nation's jails and prisons. And when I'd ask them about these encounters or these experiences, I was struck by how the vast majority of them were coming in contact with our legal system not out of any kind of criminal intent, but rather because of untreated symptomatology. My patients were shouting in the Starbucks, or they were charging through TSA checkpoints with the delusional belief that they needed to fly to Washington, D.C. and save America, which perhaps we've needed at various times, but they run afoul of our social norms. And in those moments, police are called. And when the police come in contact with severely mentally ill people, and they're taken to jails and prisons, to facilities that are punitive rather than therapeutic, I could only imagine what the outcome would be. I would see on my unit, in a therapeutic environment like my hospital, how patients would struggle, sometimes even to comply with the basic rules on the inpatient unit. And certainly we see that with COVID now. Patients struggle to maintain social distance and keep a mask on. So I thought about how difficult it must be when they were in an environment that was not therapeutic by design, but in fact was punitive by design. I started doing competency to stand trial evaluations in the jails and prisons to get a firsthand look at what was happening to mentally ill people when they fell under the auspices of the legal system. And what I found there was so disturbing to me as someone who works in the field of mental health, that it really launched this project to write this book, Waiting for an Echo. So tonight I have a brief period of time to talk with you. I'm very excited about the panel here tonight. We have many illustrious panelists and folks who are really in a position to make change. So I'm going to share just my insight as someone who works in the field of mental health and has spent time in our nation's facilities. I'm going to read a short passage from my book that really illustrates how I came to be asking some of these questions and the divide that I saw between taking care of our most vulnerable citizens and incarcerating them. And then I'll tell one brief story and then we'll be off to the races. So thank you very much for having me. And I'll share just a brief anecdote that sort of started this journey for me. If I can manage the mask and the glasses fogging up, this is like, it adds a whole new level to speaking. The trajectory of my patients' lives veers sharply when law enforcement is involved. The earliest decision by police as to whether they belong in jail or the hospital, a decision often made in the moment of the police encounter, may shape the course of the next many years of their lives. As an example, some years ago, I evaluated a man named Henry in the visiting area of a men's jail. Henry was thin and disheveled, and he looked at me with guarded suspicion as the correctional officer brought him into the room where I was already seated. He was wearing a khaki prison jumpsuit with a white t-shirt underneath, and he smelled as if he had not showered in many days. I immediately noticed that Henry's mouth was in constant motion with the involuntary movements of tardive dyskinesia, a rare but permanent side effect caused by long-term use of antipsychotic medication. I'm so sorry. I need to do a little rub of my glasses here for a second. If it worst comes to worst, I can just tell you the story. Okay. Thank you. Henry had been paranoid at the time of his arrest, and his paranoia had not, Henry had been paranoid at the time of his arrest, and his paranoia had not abated in jail. He was refusing to speak to his attorney, prompting the judge to order a competency evaluation. According to the police report, Henry's legal involvement began when he did not leave the premises of a convenience store when the manager instructed him to. Henry hid behind the store's dumpster, refusing to come out when approached by police, and shouting paranoid statements about interrogation tactics and torture and the Connecticut militia. When he finally emerged, Henry was taken to jail. His charges, criminal trespass and resisting arrest, carried a maximum combined sentence of 2 years in prison. But Henry's situation, like that of many psychotic detainees, became far more dire. Henry was prescribed an antipsychotic medication in jail but refused to take it. He might have been paranoid about the pill's safety or might not have had insight into the fact that he needed treatment. At some point, shortly after his arrest, he would not come out of his cell when asked to do so. He was then forced out by correctional officers, a procedure called a cell extraction. Still paranoid, but now with no dumpster to hide behind, Henry resisted this time by fighting back. In our nation's correctional facilities, detainees who become assaultive are typically sent to administrative segregation, a punitive form of solitary confinement known to exacerbate symptoms of mental illness. Worse still, assaulting a correctional officer is a felony charge, which in Henry's state carries a maximum sentence of 15 years in prison. If convicted, Henry would spend years in prison where mentally ill people face a disproportionate risk of being victimized. He would eventually leave prison on probation with legal requirements that would be difficult for him to manage if his symptoms returned, setting him up to incur additional time behind bars. Compare Henry's situation to that of Robert, a psychotic man who caused a similar disturbance in the community. Robert, too, was plagued by paranoid delusions. He had come into contact with police while yelling loudly in the streets of his neighborhood that he was an unwitting experimental subject in a secret government program. But unlike Henry, Robert was admitted to my inpatient unit after police decided to bring him to the hospital rather than to jail. Robert was a large, muscular man in his late 50s with a lumbering gait and erratically mussed white hair. He sat on the periphery of the unit and regarded everyone around him with suspicion. Once he was hospitalized, Robert's paranoia became rooted in a fervent belief that the hospital environment was a front and that he was, in fact, being held in a covert government facility where he was awaiting execution. Like Henry, he refused to take prescribed antipsychotic medication. As a result, his paranoid symptoms had improved little since admission. One night, new personnel were being trained on the hospital ward. Robert was in the kitchen when a staff member began demonstrating how, in case of an emergency, electronic safety blinds could be activated to cover the wall of windows that separated the kitchen from the rest of the unit. Robert became terrified by the movement of the security blinds and, in the throes of his paranoia, interpreted their closure as a signal. He believed that the unit staff was cordoning off the kitchen in preparation to execute the patients held within. Robert ran out of the kitchen screaming to the other patients, "Tonight's the night they're going to kill us all." In what he believed was self-defense in a moment of mortal peril, he began attacking the staff. In less than a minute, he assaulted and injured numerous staff members. Despite the severity of the attack, none of the injured workers felt it was appropriate to press charges. They each offered the same explanation. Robert was clearly ill and had been acting out of his illness. No one perceived him he inflicted an enormous amount of damage, but no one perceived him to have done so with malicious intent. As the unit's nursing supervisor told me in describing Robert's aggression, he was in pure terror. He thought he was fighting for his life. Robert eventually began taking appropriate medications, and his paranoia diminished. After 15 days, he was discharged home with outpatient treatment arranged by the hospital team. Henry, in contrast, remained incarcerated, facing the prospect of spending the next decade and a half of his life in prison. That, very much a relief to take my glasses off now and be able to see out. That moment really for me illustrated the division that happens when we treat some people with care and with therapeutic intervention and some people with a punitive one, and how that can really change the trajectory of someone's life. As we're talking today about solutions and possible solutions, I tell one more story just to illustrate that this is not just a policing problem, though it is that. When we call 911 for a psychiatric emergency, police respond as opposed to EMTs and paramedics who respond for medical emergencies, so it is partially that police are asked to make these decisions in the moment of the police encounter. It's also a systems problem. In researching Waiting for an Echo, I talked with the former police commander of Portland, Oregon, Commander Sarah Westbrook, who told me a story that I think really illustrates this core issue. She said there was a man at the Portland waterfront who had a gallon jug of fluid attached to a chain. He was clearly mentally ill. He was swinging the jug above his head, charging at people. People were very understandably afraid. They called police, and what Commander Westbrook described was over the course of a number of hours, the police de-escalated the situation and without any use of force, got the man eventually to sit in the back seat of the cruiser, and they took him to the emergency room. When they got to the hospital, he was evaluated in the emergency room, but there were no psychiatric beds available. According to Commander Westbrook, he was discharged from the hospital before her officers were even done with their paperwork. He returned to the waterfront. He resumed the same behavior. Police were called again, and this time he was taken to jail. Jail, of course, has an ironclad no refusal policy. They never run out of beds in the jail. And so they knew that this would solve the problem. If the psychiatric hospital wasn't able to absorb him, the jail certainly would be. She also said, and this alludes to something that the president said, she also said that her officers would sometimes conduct what they called compassionate arrests, that they would see someone clearly mentally ill and distress, and they would say, at least if he or she is in jail, I know that they get 3 hots and a cot. I know someone is giving them medication, and I know that someone is checking to make sure that they're still breathing. We would never arrest someone to get them their chemotherapy. We would never arrest someone to make sure they had their insulin for diabetes. This is purely something that we do for people with mental illness. And as someone whose job it is to treat the mentally ill, I would like to say that I think that's incredibly unjust. And I'm delighted that there are big thinkers and people who take action around the table tonight to talk about possible solutions to that problem. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the invitation, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Montrose. There we go. And now I will be introducing Dr. Jonathan Mercantini, who is the Dean of Liberal Arts College at Kean University. He's written many books on history and racial issues. Dr. Mercantini will be introducing our esteemed panelists and then moderating the conversation as we proceed. Dr. Mercantini.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Senator Lesniak, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone, to Kean University. I know we've got some members of the Kean community here, but for many others, you're guests. And this building is really one of the flagship pieces of our university, and so I'm thrilled to have everyone here. For our attendees elsewhere on the 6th floor, and for those of you that are watching remotely, we are so excited by the really tremendous interest in this event. We filled up all of the available spaces that we had here on campus, and so we're thrilled to use the technology that we all got used to with over the past 18 months to have this event delivered live stream remotely as well. For those of you that are in attendance, please, we ask that you keep your masks on even when you're talking. President Repollet has made safety one of his primary pillars here at Kane University, and because of that, we've actually had very low rates of COVID among our faculty, staff, and students, and we want to keep up our excellent reputation in that capacity. I will confess to knowing nothing about mental health courts prior to Sarah Mack from the Institute reaching out to me to ask me to moderate this event, and I think I first said no, because I didn't feel like I knew what was going on, and some of that reflects my privilege. And I'm recognizing that, but I think even more, it shows how New Jersey has really lagged behind so many other states across the country in developing mental health courts, as Dr. Montrose outlined, coming up with alternatives to the criminal justice system for dealing with people who are dealing with mental illness, which is probably exceeds even 10% of our population. We need to come up with other, better, more effective ways to get our mentally ill citizens, residents here across the country, and certainly here in the state of New Jersey, the support that they need. And this is a huge public health issue and truly a social justice issue. As I read more and more deeply, it intersects with criminal justice, but it intersects with food insecurity, it intersects with housing insecurity, it intersects with challenges of race and class that we have throughout our country and that we are trying to come to grips with, however unevenly. We really have an incredible group of speakers with us here tonight. As Senator Lesniak said at the outset, the people around this table and in the room and in the audience are really the people who are positioned to help us work to solve or at least improve this problem across the state of New Jersey. So I'm really excited for a fantastic roundtable discussion with our participants. When we conclude that, we will have a question and answer portion of the event. So again, let me start by introducing our panelists. We already heard from Dr. Christine Montrose, the author of Waiting for an Echo, the book that you have in front of you. She's an associate professor of psychiatry and human behavior at the Warren Alpert Medical School of Brown University, in addition to her clinical work that she described, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book. The book, Waiting for an Echo, was a New York Times editor's choice, and she, as the reviewer said, galvanized by her work in our nation's jail, psychiatrist Christine Montrose illuminates the human cost of mass incarceration and mental illness. Joseph Crecora is a New Jersey state public defender, serving in his second term as the chief public defender of the state of New Jersey. Mr. Krakora has stood out for diversity and fairness in his own office and for the Garden State at large. He spearheaded bail reform measures which have recognized and reduced the disproportionate impact of mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses on people of color in urban centers. Next to him is Ms. Maureen O'Brien. Since 2011, Ms. O'Brien has worked with state government agencies to lead training and education in areas of mental health, law enforcement, criminal law, and the diversionary aspects of the criminal justice system, including crisis intervention team training. She previously served as the assistant prosecutor for Union County from 1983 to 2011, and she also has a very important consulting career. Next to her is Mr. Corey Storch, the executive director of Bridgeway Behavioral Health Services. Mr. Storch has devoted his career to treating those afflicted by mental illness with compassion. Under his tutelage, Bridgeway has developed and sustained programs which help address the criminalization of mental illness, and their Justice Involved Services program works to divert from and out of incarceration those nonviolent offenders with persistent mental illness. Justice Involved Services at Bridgeway focus on education, treatment, housing, and integrating mentally ill offenders back into their community. Seated next to him is Mr. Ted Romankow, currently serving as counsel to the firm of Javerbaum Wergoft. Mr. Romankow was appointed as the chief law enforcement officer for Union County in 2002, and served as the Union County Prosecutor until 2013. He chaired the Prosecutors Association Juvenile Justice Committee and has served in a number of capacities on the Drug Court Committee, the Child Life Protection Commission, and the Coalition for the Prevention of Substance Abuse. Notably, particularly for our conversation tonight, he was responsible in 2006 for, in large part, for the creation of the Union County Mental Health Criminal Diversionary Programs, which connected low-level offenders with mental illness to treatment. We have Mr. Robert Mizio, a public defender and defense attorney with over 32 years of courtroom experience. I was really excited when I saw the list of panelists because it was fascinating to me that we were going to have public defenders and prosecutors, but collaborating together. And maybe I don't watch enough TV or too much TV, but it seemed like if they were in agreement, then we were at a good starting place. Mr. Mizio, again, has been specializing in criminal law since 1988, and after 25 years in private practice, he joined the Office of the Public Defender in 2017 as the first assistant deputy, and then subsequently was appointed as the deputy for the Union County Trial Region in 2019. So his office handles approximately 80% of the criminal cases charged in Union County, many of which, of course, have individuals who are dealing with or have a previous history of mental health illness. And finally, we have Mr. William Daniel, sworn in as the Union County Prosecutor as of July of 2021. Mr. Daniel plays a pivotal role in revitalizing Union County mental health criminal diversionary programs. Prior to becoming the Union County Prosecutor earlier this year, he served as a New Jersey Superior Court Justice, municipal judge of the Township of Linden, and prior to that as a municipal prosecutor and an assistant municipal prosecutor. So that gives him a unique insider perspective on the function of the justice system, how it relates to mental illness, and it's really vital to the public discourse on this important issue. So please, let's give a round of applause and welcome to all of our panelists. Certainly we'll ask you to use the microphone when you're speaking, and then just pop that green button back off when you've answered the question. And I guess the big question, and I think I want to start with Mr. Crecora, if I might. In what ways do you think the criminal justice system has failed to adequately deal with cases involving mentally ill offenders? And I think not just from when we've seen the mental health court start, which has a bit of a legacy now, but even more recently with those kinds of questions.
Ooh, boy. I don't know, it's almost as bad talking with the mask as it is trying to lead. And I have notes, but I won't be able to use them because then I have to put my glasses on and they'll fog up. So thank you for inviting me. My name is Joe Krakora. I am the New Jersey State Public Defender, a position I have held now for just over 10 years. I've been with the office a little over 30, however, and a big part of my career was spent representing people in murder cases and capital murder cases. And looking back at it and thinking about the percentage of those clients who were suffering from really severe mental health issues, it kind of puts in perspective the failure of the criminal justice system to deal with mentally ill offenders. And I think that's because there's this tension between a recognition that many people violate the law, get caught up in different types of criminal conduct, whether it's nonviolent or violent, and the underpinning of that is often the mental illness that's driving or affecting the person's behavior. But the tension is that that's the same person who then, to large segments of the community and to people in the criminal justice system, makes that person scary. And people are afraid of people with mental illness, if we're going to be honest about it. And so the tension is that kind of public safety concern that the only way we can protect the community from someone who's seriously mentally ill and committing violent crimes is to lock them up. And that's the path of least resistance. So things like defenses to criminal cases like insanity and diminished capacity, they basically, for all practical purposes, don't exist in the real world because people are afraid of that level of violence often committed by people who have serious mental health problems. So I think that the failure of our system can be tied to the inability of the stakeholders to find a consensus, to find common ground on how we're going to seriously deal with people who commit crimes who are mentally ill. Those of you who are familiar with New Jersey's criminal justice system know that almost 5 years ago, we enacted the most progressive pretrial release system in the country. We eliminated cash bail. which was discriminating against low-level offenders who couldn't come up with small amounts of bail and sat in jail. And it turned out to be a remarkable accomplishment that reduced the number of people in our jails waiting for trial by close to 40%. But the only reason that worked is that the stakeholders came together and we formed a consensus that this reform was needed. And not everybody came to the table with the same motivation. Prosecutors came to it because they wanted to lock up violent offenders and repeat offenders without bail so they couldn't buy their way out of jail. And folks like me came to it because we wanted to get our clients who were being held on low-level drug offenses because they didn't have $500 to post bail. But the bottom line is everybody came. The judiciary, the legislature, the criminal defense bar, law enforcement, the prosecutors, and everybody agreed that we needed to make this reform. And that's why it happened. So if we don't do the same thing here with this issue, we're not going to accomplish meaningful reform. So if we have a system where, for example, it's only prosecutors who get to decide which offenders are eligible for treatment rather than imprisonment, it's not going to work because they have a different set of goals sometimes than the defense attorneys or the judges. So if we're going to really address this, the stakeholders have to come together. There has to be legislation which ultimately enacted criminal justice reform, as Senator Lesniak, I'm sure, remembers, and it has to have all the stakeholders at the table with a common ground. New Jersey has a really successful drug court program. Why? Because all the stakeholders get, and they sit around a table and they evaluate the case and they try to figure out what the treatment plan is that will help this person overcome his addiction and not commit crimes in the future. A similar model is the only way we're going to make it work here in the context of mental health. So I think if I could deliver a message as how to fix this failure so far, it's to get the stakeholders to reach common ground and come up with a system that has determines who's eligible for treatment rather than prison, what's the procedure to be followed in the court that is set up to handle these cases, who's eligible for, not have a blanket exemption for everyone just because of the nature of the crime that the person's accused of. It can't be limited necessarily to nonviolent or misdemeanor low-level offenses. It's got to be more open than that. But all of those things are going to be dependent on getting all the stakeholders together to say this is an issue that a reform that is needed, and we have to make it happen.
Thank you for that. Mr. Daniel, I think I might put you on the spot as the prosecutor, not so much to rebut, but essentially to give your assessment and if you think that's viable and in bringing the people to the table, how do we make that work and create a future for a really strong diversionary health, mental health court here in Union County and across the state?
I'd be happy to answer that to the best of my ability. Let's see. I couldn't agree with the Public Defender Crecora more on just about everything he said. But I want to focus. And also Public Defender Maceo. He didn't speak yet, but I know I'm going to agree with him as well. So seriously, this is an immense project. It's an immense undertaking, and I'm here with Assistant Prosecutor Tiffany Wilson, who is the director of our pre-indictment division within the prosecutor's office. She has over 20 years' experience in the prosecutor's office, and she oversees the diversionary programs within our office, whether it's drug court, whether it's the mental health diversion program, PTI, and there's one other one. I don't even know what everything. What is it? Veterans Diversion Program. And I wanted Tiffany to be here tonight to perhaps answer some of the more particularized questions, the inner workings of the program. Now, as the prosecutor for about 80 days now, but having been a Superior Court judge for 18 years and having other experience, and I know, Doctor, you touched on it, I think I have a unique perspective to many of the issues that are facing us. And as I heard the doctor reading from her book, I was like, I've seen that before. I've seen that. I've seen situations where people have been locked up and sitting there and waiting for 3 months to get a competency evaluation down at Ann Klein because that's the only place they could get it. And 3 months is on the lower end of the spectrum. There have been people incarcerated for many longer periods of time. Sitting in drug court. I've seen our drug court program in New Jersey work. It's a success. I believe in it. I was there for 3 years. It was one of the best assignments I had as a judge. And I'm just so proud of the people that have gone through drug court, the participants, the attorneys, the defendants who applied to drug court and got in and turned their lives around, and I see them in our community now, and you know, the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. The recidivism rate for drug court graduates is it's very, very low. I have yet to see a drug court graduate back in court being charged with committing offenses. Now, there probably were, but under my watch, the 3 years that I was there, I have yet to see someone come back being charged with offenses. The mental health diversion program, if I'm characterizing it correctly, yes, we have that here in Union County. We've had it for a long time, and someone mentioned it's also in Mercer. Mr. President, I think you mentioned that as well. I presided over that, and those were the best days as a judge when I was in that program. Sitting before these individuals coming into court and working with Bridgeway and the few providers that we have, and witnessing them complete the program and go on with their lives and lead a successful life. And what treating the mental health issues that led in large part to these individuals committing these crimes, that goes hand in hand with public safety too, because I hear the conversation, we must treat mental health issues. As a prosecutor, I also have a public safety component of concern, and it all goes hand in hand. It's a big, it's like this, not the circle of life, but it's a big circle. And Mr. Crecora, you said, we need everybody at the table. Well, we're here tonight, and this is a start. And I could go on. I'm sorry. I'm just really, I'm impassioned about this, and we'll get to Ms. Wilson. Go ahead, sure.
Thank you so much. So I too agree with Mr. Krakora. Obviously, there might be a couple areas that we might differ, and I think the benefit of having this here in Union County at Kane and having the people that we have here at the table is we have created a successful program in Union County. We are always willing to grow and to learn more, but I think we serve as a great example of what happens when all of the parties are at the table. Mr. Maceo is here. I work very closely with my counterpart in his office, and I think the benefits that our office sees and his office sees in having assistant prosecutors or public defenders who are part of this program is that we also get that benefit in many other places. So there may be cases where there's a competency issue or where the NGRI, the not guilty by reason of insanity, is the solution that should come from that particular case. But having an assistant prosecutor or a public defender who is knowledgeable about the system and quite frankly can work through the system, the mental health system in New Jersey is an interesting place that is sometimes very hard to navigate, definitely hard to navigate for people who have mental illness. When you have people like my counterpart Michelle in the Union County trial region, or myself, we can help our counterparts also navigate that system. And luckily for us, the judiciary in Union County has been very supportive of our program. And so they've given us a judge. And having a judge there that sort of puts the oversight over the program, we have found has been very beneficial to the participants in the program. So while it is not a formal drug court that's sponsored by, or a mental health court that's sponsored by the AOC, we have received support from the union vicinage, and that has been a great partnership between the public defender's office, our office, Bridgeway, who's also at the table, and Trinitas Hospital, and the judiciary in really bringing this together and having great success. So I'm very happy to see and always happy to be part of the conversation on ways in which we can expand. Even if we don't necessarily agree on every issue, I think we all agree on the overarching goal. And so I'm very happy to be here, so thank you.
That's great. For Ted Romankow, I wonder if you could maybe...
Excuse me, I can't take this anymore. It's Ted
Romanko. My apologies, Mr. Romanko and Senator Lesniak. It was under your leadership back in 2005 that the very first mental health diversion program to provide treatment and oversight as an alternative to incarceration and to the issues that Dr. Montrose raised, I think is started. So maybe as a little background, could you talk about how you recognize the need, or how the need was recognized more largely, and in getting that started, and maybe that can help us chart the pathway forward?
Sure. Originally, I was a public defender, by the way. I started my career as a public defender, which kind of helped me when I became a prosecutor. I was also a municipal prosecutor, but when I became the prosecutor in 2002, I recognized that there were some serious problems concerning individuals who had mental health issues. That I saw way back when I first started my career, and essentially nothing was done at that point in time by the judiciary, by the legislature, by the prosecutors, by the public defenders, by anyone. It just, you tried the case and the person had a problem, and they would go to jail, and hopefully they would receive some psychotropic drugs, and everybody would go home that night. But what happened in 2004, I was there a little bit about a year and a half. An assistant prosecutor, the head of my trial, she was trial supervisor, Gina Caulfield, she's now a Superior Court judge in Union County, came into me and she said, we've got about 50 or so cases here. And we had hundreds and hundreds, we had thousands of cases actually, come through our doors. She said, I don't know how to handle these people. We don't know what to do with them. We don't want to prosecute them, but we can't let them go. They're nonviolent. What do you think we ought to do? So we started to talk. I talked with Maureen O'Brien, who I'll have a lot to say later about that too. And we said, okay, well, one of the things we can do is try to get some help from outside sources. She suggested I go before the Governor Cody's task force on mental health, which I did do. I told them that we needed people in our county to evaluate these people. We needed psychologists, we needed psychiatrists, we needed people to house these people, to do something with them. We just didn't want to prosecute them. Subsequently, we did receive a grant, thank you, Governor Cody, through the legislature, of $600,000 to the county. Most of that went into Bridgeway and Trinitas Hospital because we knew we had to partner up with someone to develop some kind of plan. Over that period of time, while we were waiting for the money, a group of us, including some judges in Union County, went over to Brooklyn, over to Kings County in Brooklyn, the health court, and we observed what they were doing, what the judge was doing there, and it was fascinating to us. We came back, Maureen and I started talking to defense attorneys. We talked to the court judges, the DAG. We talked to some individuals who were involved in mental health courts outside the state of New Jersey. We talked to anybody we could because nothing was original. We knew that. We weren't going to invent something that didn't exist. And mental health courts had been started years before in California and other places, and we thought this is a great way to do it. But when we approached the AOC, we were told, you're not going to get a mental health court. And then one of the assignment judges, I won't mention the name, said to me, you'll never get a mental health court while I'm the judge here. And I know why, because he got orders from above. They didn't want boutique courts. That's basically why. They weren't opposed to the idea, but they just didn't want boutique courts. But what happened was, as a result of this, we created a diversionary unit in 2005. In 2005, Maureen was in charge of it. We developed a treatment plan, twofold, with Trinitas Hospital. They gave us the clinical information. They gave us someone to screen these individuals to tell us what course of treatment was necessary for a defendant. We went to Bridgeway, and we said, okay, guys, we need some kind of plan from you to how these people are going to live out the rest of their lives. What can you do to help us? So with a combination of both these plans, we then went to the defendant. And by that time, the defense bar really accepted this. They acknowledged it was a good thing. They invited us in. We invited their defendants to come in. And we said, hey, here's the bottom line. You follow the treatment plan, and a couple things can happen. We'll drop your charges. We'll dismiss your charges. Probation. A lot of good things will happen. We had a number of people over the course of the years that I was there enter that program into and through Bridgeway and Trinitas. It was highly successful. We had a professor from the College of Medicine and Dentistry who was a specialist in statistics and psychological statistics, some area. I know nothing about. And he studied this. He studied our program. The program worked. He said, wow, this thing was terrific. There were some problems with it. A number of people quit along the way, but those who completed the recidivism rate was only 33% after 5 years. Think about that. Doctor, you know that nationwide we have some recidivism that ranges anywhere from 50 to 90%, depending where you are. This was a fantastic program. So we followed through with it. We kept going with NAMI. We created a film, Maureen and I, the community we serve. I think they're still using it. We brought people into the police academy, recruits. We taught them through skits by the Mental Health Players Association. They came and gave skits about how to decompensate people who were having serious problems. We did a number of things. We increased the in-service training during that time about mental health, and it all worked. It worked fantastically. Tiffany was part of that. Maureen headed it. She brought in crisis intervention training, which she can talk about. So overall, we had a great plan. I'm hoping that the courts will cooperate. We need legislation here. We've got stakeholders that will work together, obviously. The public defender's office, the prosecutor's office, and old guys like me who sit on a park bench throwing peanuts to birds now will offer their 2 cents. But we can do something here, but we need to have people involved in it.
There we go. Thank you, Ted. First of all, I want to mention that when they said that you'll never get a mental health court in New Jersey, I'm recalled about the time when the counsel for the National Football League said to me, Lesniak, you're never going to overturn that federal ban on sports betting. And one of our goals here today will be to create model legislation. We have all the stakeholders here. We'll expand it as well to be introduced at the next legislative session in January, so we can get this right. And in that regard, I want to ask you a specific question. That appropriation, that $600,000, how long did that last?
It didn't last very long, maybe a couple of years.
Okay.
Maureen, am I right about that? Was it, you know more about that part of it?
I was in the unit for approximately 6 years before I retired. It lasted at the $600,000 level for at least 3, maybe 4 years.
Yeah, not much.
It was reduced to $300,000, and actually, Mr. Storch could address that to know
Okay.
whether they're still getting any funding.
Because one of the things we will want to do in our model legislation is to have an appropriation with it to go through the Budget Committee. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, by the way, I'll just add this. I read your book. Electronically. I didn't read it tonight that quickly. But I read it. This is absolute necessity for any prosecutor, any person who's in the defense area and criminal. It is wonderful. It really is a terrific book. Congratulations, Doctor.
So I think having, listened to that piece and understanding how central you were, Ms. O'Brien, to it, I wonder if you could talk about what aspects of the diversionary process you thought to be most successful, and maybe ones that we definitely, or maybe some other ideas that you have that we weren't able to include 10 years ago or 15 years ago that we would want to include in that model legislation now.
Oh boy, where do I start? Here's my wish list. I think what we didn't have, as Senator Lesniak just referenced, is money. We've got wonderfully well-intentioned people. In Union County, the prosecutor, myself and the other attorneys that worked with me, and the defense bar, especially the public defender's office, was great. We were all on the same page. We wanted the same thing. We were very fortunate to have Trinitas and Bridgeway, so there were services available, but there was no housing. There were a lot of things that were lacking. If somebody lived out of county but committed an offense in Union County, we couldn't accept them into the program, even if they were appropriate, because that county didn't have services. And so if we're going forward with any kind of a mental health court, mental health program, whatever it might be, however it looks, you have got to have the services, and they have to be coordinated. They have to be willing to work with the justice system and with the courts. Very early on, before we had the court, and I would go out and I would meet with directors of different mental health programs. It's like, oh, well, this is voluntary. We don't do this. We can't tell you if they violate. It's like, yes, you can. When a defendant is agreeing to participate in treatment in lieu of going to prison or jail, they're signing a release. They're saying, yes, you can tell the court how I'm doing. Yes, you can tell the prosecutor. Yes, you can tell my attorney. So we have to educate the mental health system on the criminal justice process, and that they have to understand their role in the process. But we absolutely need more treatment. We need the money for treatment. It won't work if you don't have the services. You know, it works in Union County because I was in the office for 30 years. I had an experience with the defense bar. You know, I was ready to take my gloves off when Joe says, you know, it's not going to be only a prosecutor program. It kind of is in Union County. It was, but I know this sounds corny. New Jersey courts and the U.S., even the U.S. Supreme Court and everybody in between has said, you know, prosecutor's job is not to seek conviction, it's to do justice. And I see the mental health court as exactly that. It's doing justice. Do certain people belong in state prison? Absolutely. I'm not saying every person who has a mental illness is going to be appropriate for the program. If their mental illness impacts their criminal behavior and they are willing to participate in treatment, they're appropriate. But just because somebody has a mental illness doesn't mean they're appropriate. One of the things in the legislation, the only qualifying factor is, do you have a mental illness? Well, okay. CIT was mentioned, and police intervention. This week, I've been training all week long because this is our crisis intervention team training week. And, you know, we teach cops about intervention. One of the gentlemen that speaks to the class applied to jail diversion when I was there. I rejected him from the program. He went to state prison for 3 years. He now comes and speaks to the program because he wants to educate cops on what it's like to have a mental illness. But he always took his medication. He got involved in an aggravated assault because his buddy got involved in a bar fight and he jumped in to help. His mental illness had absolutely nothing to do with the offense, and the victim was very seriously injured. If we look at the part of the legislation that's pending, all they look at is, do you have a mental illness? But we have to look at, is that mental illness related to your behavior? We also have to look at background, because you mentioned it's nonviolent, disorderly persons offenses. To be blunt, that's a waste of time and money. I'm not saying they don't deserve treatment or they don't deserve to be diverted, but the municipal court system happens so rapidly that somebody could be out of the system before they're even identified to have a problem. Whereas in Superior Court, in my opinion, you get more bang for your buck. You've got people who are more seriously ill, committing more serious crimes, and if we can engage those people in treatment and keep them out of the system, we are doing the right thing for that person, but we're also, as the prosecutor said, it's a public safety issue. There are fewer crimes if we can engage them in treatment. I could sit here for the next hour and nobody else will get a chance to talk because there are so many things in that bill that need to, the intention is pure, it is right, we should do it, but it is so extremely limited. We can't not look at violent offenses because you can't just say, oh, he's got a charge of robbery, we don't want him. One example and I will shut up, I hope. No promises. I had a case early on, it was a robbery. If I'm looking at the charge, he's denied from jail diversion. When I looked at the facts, the man shoplifted 3 packages of boxer briefs from the Jersey Gardens Mall. When the manager tried to stop him, he just took a swing at the manager and he missed. So there wasn't even an injury, but it's technically a robbery. It's the use of force in the commission of a theft. He doesn't deserve to go to prison for 10 years on that. We looked at the charges, we looked at the facts. I talked to the manager. I said, here's what's going on, here's what we'd like to do. Do you have any objection? He was evaluated by Trinitas. Bridgeway said we'd love to work with him. We pled him to a disorderly persons offense. We didn't do an outright dismissal because he was charged with a robbery, a serious crime. We pled him to a disorderly persons offense. We put him in a treatment program. He did wonderfully. And so there's got to also be the discretion to do an outright dismissal, to downgrade, whether it's to a disorderly persons offense or whether it's to a 3rd or a 4th degree from a 1st or a 2nd degree, or put them on probation when they were really facing a state prison charge. So while Mr. Crecora says, it can't only be a prosecutor, we've got to be able to employ our prosecutorial discretion in determining the outcome of the case. Because while the veterans program is well-intentioned, it ties the prosecutor's hands because it requires an outright dismissal. And if I'm not comfortable doing an outright dismissal, but I am comfortable doing a downgrade, I'm going to reject somebody who is a wonderful candidate and worthy of the program, but because you're tying my hands by legislation and saying you must dismiss, I have to say, no, I'm sorry, you're not appropriate. So there's a lot. I'll try to shut up now.
No, that was very helpful. And the legislation that you've been referencing, Maureen, has been introduced in the legislature and well-intentioned. And we will be working with not only those sponsors, but the entire legislature in implementing a comprehensive mental health court program for New Jersey, which includes an adequate appropriation. And with the talent that we have around here and with all the stakeholders, I'm sure we'll get it done. So thank you for your input.
It looked like you.
No, just jump in. See, here's the thing, and now I'm going to blow some smoke. See, if we had prosecutors in 21 counties who approached this issue the way Ted did in 2004 and started this, and the way Maureen did when she was running it, if we had 20 other counties that were open-minded to the program and trying to do the right thing the way they have in this county, then it would be very different. But, and I'm not familiar with the program in Mercer. The only other county I'm aware of where the prosecutor's office is open to such a diversionary program is Essex, and they have a pretty good functioning program in Essex now. Well, but they do. I mean, and frankly, has far more people in the program in Essex now than are in Union now here since Ted left, to be honest. So when I say we need all the stakeholders, and the stakeholders are at the table in this county. They're at the table at this end, but we don't have 20. I can't tell you how resistant some county prosecutors are to the idea of even establishing any kind of diversionary program for even the most minor offenses. And that's really the frustrating part. And that really underscores my view that we have to have legislation that requires counties to have such a court, because you can't count on it having prosecutors who approach this issue the way these folks here have in Union County for the last 16, 17 years.
I wanted to ask Joe a question. We had a conversation a little while back about the Chief Justice was going to send some of you, I think you were included, down to Florida to check the mental health courts there, which I read their the background. I read the information about their courts. They're phenomenal.
Actually, I did not, but Carl Hertman, who is the director of mental health advocacy for my office and is sitting right across from me here, was in that group that went to Miami with the chief, Judge Grant, a couple prosecutors, representatives of the Attorney General's office. And as I recall, do you have a microphone? You don't have one, or do you? Yeah, just hit the
there we
button,
go.
Carl. Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was a wonderful model in Miami run by a judge who really understood how this should work.
No, you're absolutely right, and former prosecutor Romanko is correct about that. I was part of a delegation, and the difference today, as opposed to years ago when the Chief Justice said, or whoever said, we're not going to do this. Chief Justice Rabner was in Miami. He started a commission, statewide commission. There's probably 50 people. I think Tiffany may be on it. I'm on it. The acting administrative office of the court's director, Judge Grant, was in Miami and is behind it, and is one of the moving forces to get this thing going in Essex County. They got a grant of, I think, $500,000 to get that going. So the judiciary and Attorney General Grewal, when he was in the office, was also in Florida. So it was a tremendous opportunity for me to see a real working operation. But I can tell you, Ted Romanko, things have changed. You know, in the courts now, this is a great time to deal with this issue because the judiciary and the Attorney General's office and the Public Defender's office are all behind these types of initiatives, which start with crisis intervention training. It starts when the police are called, and does the person go to jail or do they go to treatment? And then all the way up the line in terms of peer counselors, in terms of jail screening tools. You know what does anyone know the biggest biggest mental hospital in New Jersey? Trinitas? No, it's the Essex County Jail is the biggest mental hospital in New Jersey. And if you talk to the jail warden, they'll say, help me out. I've got people here who won't take medication, can't go to court. There's no place for them to go. So you can have the jail directors on board. You can have the Attorney General's office on board. You can get local police departments who want this type of training, which is very extensive but very effective to keep people out of the system. And if they're in the system, to try to get them out of jail early on and get them help. Or if they're still in the system, you know, that mental health courts would seem to be a very good way to attack it. So this center is very timely. This is a great time to hold this conference and to get people together. So thank you.
I just have one really brief follow-up because coincidentally, that judge who said basically over my dead body was actually our first mental health court judge and extremely supportive of the program. So conversation, discussion, education really does a lot.
I'm going to go to Mr. Storch first.
Yeah, so I'm here to support the movement towards more mental health courts. Ted Romanko invited me for that reason. And, if Ted says you have to come, you should, because Ted was a prosecutor. He still has those law enforcement connections, I think. So I think moving in this direction is important, but having mental health courts is not sufficient to solve these problems, the criminalization of mental illness. We need more services. A big part of the problem is that our mental health system is under-resourced and inadequate to respond. So a big part of that is that the traditional outpatient services that a lot of people need come with like a 30 or 60-day waiting list. In Union County, there's a waiting list. We serve in Hudson County. The waiting list there is even worse. And what happens is people, while they're waiting to get their appointment, they'll go into crisis. And then things get worse because our crisis response system is also not adequate and it really needs to be improved in partnership with the police. Every county has a mobile screening service. This is where people call when they think somebody's behavior is like really bizarre, strange, or maybe even dangerous. So those calls in some of our counties, a lot of our counties, those calls go to the police. They should go to a mental health person, a mental health practitioner. So in a lot of the counties, the default response is the police go out, and often that makes the person in crisis even it makes it a worse crisis. And then to make matters worse, A lot of these cases, they're transported by ambulance to the emergency department, and people are even more traumatized. And this leads to, in many cases, to people becoming violent. You know, they may, at the beginning of the crisis, maybe the dangerousness wasn't there, but it gets worse. And we can, you know, if we can address those kinds of issues, we will be able to divert people from the court system so that the mental health court will not be overwhelmed with a lot of misdemeanors that could actually be diverted directly to treatment by the police. And then on top of that, we also have homeless people who are suffering from a mental health condition. Bridgeway has a homeless outreach project in Union County, and we see this. So these are, you know, these are folks that may be committing what some people call like crimes of survival. So they're not even doing anything illegal, but the police are the ones who come into contact with them, and somehow or other some of those folks get into the legal system as well, and they don't belong there. So yes, we need mental health courts, but we make sure that we don't burden them with the cases that don't need to be in the court system at all. And really, I agree with Maureen. We should focus more on the more serious crimes. You know, obviously being very careful about that, but I think that's where the courts really can be more helpful.
Thank you. This is just exciting to hear about, and I'm really enjoying the different perspectives. And of course, my perspective is a healthcare and advocacy perspective, and what I wanted to respond to, first of all, from Mr. Storch is I agree that preemptive action is necessary, right? That many of the patients that I see that come in contact with police do so because they've had inadequate access to treatment to begin with, that they fall into crisis and they're more apt to have behaviors that are associated with crisis, that had they had adequate access to treatment, outpatient medication, outpatient psychotherapy, it would save them those interactions. It would save them inpatient hospitalizations, which are very expensive also. And I really wanted to underscore something Ms. O'Brien said, and that is that we have a long history in our country of having altruistic ideas about how to treat the mentally ill and then underfunding those ideas in a way that really disserve our most vulnerable citizens. So in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, when we had deinstitutionalization, we had a great idea about moving people out of the state hospitals and getting them into the communities to a least restrictive environment. We failed to provide adequate funding for people, so suddenly people who had required a high level of care were without medication, without treatment, without housing, without food, and they were suddenly sleeping in doorways and sleeping in parks and stealing subsistence items and begging for food and loitering, and suddenly these people who had been under the auspices of healthcare shifted to be under the auspices of the criminal justice system. New Jersey's not alone. The largest psychiatric facility in the country is the Cook County Jail in Chicago. And so I think when I hear these ideas, which I applaud roundly, I think Ms. O'Brien's point that there has to be adequate funding to support these programs in a real way is really critical. There's a national push toward a 988 number instead of 911, so people could call 988 in a psychiatric emergency, but we have to have funding that undergirds that so that there's an actual robust response that then provides people care and connects them to services. So I'm not a numbers person. I don't have to fight over money in my job in the legislature, but I do want to underscore how we have a tradition in this country that's a shameful one of not providing the funds needed for our most vulnerable citizens. So I wanted to echo that point. Thank you.
Mr. Mazzeo, I wanted to reach out to you and maybe get your thoughts on how we can increase the diversion of criminal cases, whether it's into a mental health court or even earlier diversionary programs. I think we've heard about how that in some cases this could even be accomplished quicker and faster that with some other resources at our disposal.
Portion that you were referring to, certainly we don't condone that. But, we talk about the stakeholders that need to come together, and as Carl pointed out, the biggest hospital in New Jersey for mental health is the Essex County Jail. The jailers have metamorphosized over the years. and they are not only the jailers of our clients, but now we've joined hands with them because they're the first level of care that our clients see. And I'm going to refer to the drug court model because although the Union County Jail has recently been closed and our clients were transferred to the Essex County Jail, you know, we had such a wonderful working relationship with the jail and their administration. You know, it was about awareness and screening for people who were coming in. And, you know, at several years ago, in the forefront was, and still is, but the opioid epidemic. And it was the correctional facilities that were diagnosing our clients upon entry. It was their personnel that was trained to administer the Vivitrol shots to our clients, which was, you know, so important in their, you know, recovery and treatment. And they also were staffed with individuals that would set them up for aftercare or after services upon release, but during the pendency of their case. These are the systems that need to be put into place. And I think that if we follow that drug court model and through an AOC kind of sanctioned model, that's how we're going to see the most success. Because the drug court model, as Prosecutor Daniel alluded to, is successful. If you've ever seen a drug court graduation, it's quite stirring. Dare say even emotional. And we'll see the same results as Senator Lesniak said. This is going to be a landmark day because a year from now you're going to see change. Now, obviously, the piece of legislation that was provided to us here needs a little more teeth, a little more kind of guidance. I know the Essex model is locating or, you know, focusing on third and fourth degree charges. But I think what's most important in the development of this is what Maureen said. We have to expand the criteria. You know, mental health, I've spoken with individuals at the various mental health facilities around the state, and when I say, well, what about this candidate? You know, why can't we admit this person? They say, well, he's a danger, and we have to protect our staff, and that's understandable. But yet at the same token, it's these individuals, the ones who have these issues with a violent occurrence, that need the help. These are the people that need the help, right? As Maureen said, that the the statutory bars, at least, have recently been eradicated in the drug court model. Before, years ago, we toured several facilities. We had the presiding judge with us. We had members from the prosecutor's office, and we toured the Morris County Jail, who had a robust drug court program. And we met with the inmates. They put us in a room with about 20 or so inmates, and we were doing a Q&A. And there was one individual, and this is what struck me about why we had to expand the criteria. He was a gentleman in his 50s who had a lifelong addiction problem. And he said, you know, I want to get into drug court, but I have an aggravated assault conviction from 20 years ago. Now, the person who committed that offense 20 years ago was not the same person who was sitting in front of me during that interview. That's what we need. We need to expand the criteria so more people can get the help that they need, and not just the proposed legislation kind of addresses DPs and petty DPs. So, you know, it wouldn't even involve our office, Joe, right? I mean, we're not even involved in that. We wouldn't even represent those individuals. Our agency, and, you know, Carl Herman, you know, the director of the mental health advocates, you know, this has become an issue in the forefront. And I was happy, and I want to commend Ted, because, you know, when I came to the public defender's office, I didn't know Ted. You know, I only came here in 2017, but I had always heard about the robust program that took place when Ted was at the helm of the prosecutor's office, and as Maureen has alluded to, and other members from the office, and Tiffany. Ted reached out to me on several occasions years ago, back in 2018, 2019, tirelessly trying to push this issue back to the forefront. So I thank you for that, because it's these kinds of conversations that are the impetus to getting this kind of legislation off the ground, and this is what is needed. Just like with drug court, mental health issues now are in the forefront. We're seeing a lot of it, especially now During the pandemic, we've seen mental health issues on the rise. So, you know, I do appreciate that effort, and I think that's what's needed here. And I think, to your question, that then you'll see an increase in the individuals being directed into these diversionary programs. And I'll finish with this, that it's not lost on me that Bill Daniel and I are sitting next to each other. As the head prosecutor in Union County, and I'm the public defender for the County of Union, we're sitting together not because our name tags are together, but we're going to work together. I have every confidence that we will work together to further these issues in the county. I had the privilege of appearing before Bill Daniel when he was a Superior Court judge, and you know, his concern about these issues is genuine, and I feel confident that we'll be able to work together hand in hand to further these issues because, you know, as I had said one time during the drug court initiative, it's not the public defender coming to the prosecutor with hat in hand. This is an issue that we all have to join hands and we all have to tackle together. It's not one-sided. It's not just the public defender trying to get a better deal for a client. These issues, you can walk down Broad Street in Elizabeth and this issue is right in front of your face. So we'll all join hands, we'll all come to the table, and we need to all tackle this issue together. Thanks for having us here. I appreciate it.
So I think we've established the overrepresentation of those with mental illness in the criminal justice system. I think Dr. Montrose's work and the point that's been made about Essex County Jail illustrates that, right? We've got models of programs that show success, a couple here in New Jersey, others across the country, right? We can see that these programs are effective with the lowered recidivism rates, et cetera. So what's the biggest hurdle? I mean, why is the proposed legislation as limited as it is? And maybe not all of you think that it's limited, but I think everyone's kind of picked it apart a little bit. What is the biggest hurdle or hurdles? I expect it's kind of plural. You're in charge.
Yeah, I think I can answer that question. Until today, quite frankly, there wasn't a unified approach to this issue. And again, I want to thank Dr. Montrose for her book, which has brought this to the fore. And that's what we needed. We needed a catalyst. The legislation that's been introduced in the legislature will not be our starting point. Legislation more like in Florida, which has a much more comprehensive and better experience, will be where we're starting from. And the folks around this table are going to be the Army, if you will, to bring this to the stakeholders, not only the legislators. We have to convince the administrative office of the courts that this is the way to go. And I think we're on our way to doing that. There has been a changed head in the attitude from Judge Grant and I think we're going to get a lot of support. So we just have to keep this going and keep pressing. And if anybody knows me, we're going to get it done.
Can I follow up on that? The other thing is fear. People have this misperception that people with mental illness are violent. And the majority are not. They're actually more likely to be victimized than to be the offender. And so there's this societal perception. So I think when legislatures or when people are talking about it, they're looking at low level, nonviolent, because of the fear factor. I mean, there were cases where I made a legal decision and said, no, this person is too violent. And yet Trinitas and Bridgeway said, no, we know this person, we've worked with them, we think they're a really good candidate, we want to give it a shot. And they convinced me that we should try. So it's also educating the public, educating the legislators about mental illness and what it really is, because what we see is the worst of the worst, the mass shootings, and that's what gets the attention, the violent cases, but it is really a very small percentage, and I think that's a huge factor in why when legislation is drafted, it's looking at petty disorderly persons offense and DPs, where The person's in and out of the courtroom and sentenced because you get a fine before anybody even knows there's an issue. I'm a little passionate, I'm sorry.
We know, by the way, Maureen, that legislation is not going anywhere. We're going to get it done and done the right way.
Yeah, I point this out. I think it's also a question of money. It always boils down to money.
The cost of not doing something. Let's not forget about that.
And we have to include some of your money in this too, right? I think. And then we can take care of the whole program at once. That was a problem years ago. The Chief Justice Rabner appointed 21 stakeholders, and we met over a period of 2 years, and we came up with a report called the Interbranch Advisory Committee of Mental Health Initiatives, a long name. But essentially what we were trying to do was to locate the points of intersection with a defendant and the judiciary and the criminal justice system to see how we can make it a little bit easier for a person with mental illness to get through it. But during the course of that, it became very clear that there were opposing factors. I was pushing, along with another prosecutor in Hunterdon County, Tony Kearns, we were pushing for the Superior Court diversionary court system, and there were others who were pushing for the municipal court. Now, the municipal court had at least at that time about 100,000 cases a year, incredible number of cases. And a lot of those people obviously have mental illnesses. And Maureen is right. By the time if you try to get a diversionary program in there, it may be difficult because by the time you turn and want to suggest that they be examined by a screener, they're already gone. You know, they paid their $50 and they don't care. So it presented a problem. But the problem was you're taking away money from the municipal court, the mental health court that we want to create, and you want to put it in the Superior Court, and then you had guys like me saying, you want to take the money and put it in municipal court? No, we want it too. So there's going to be a problem, but it's not a problem that can't be overcome. I'm just suggesting that it's going to be a matter of money, and it's a lot of money, not only for the screening and the services, the initial services, then we have to consider the treatment, we have to consider the outside services that we have Corey talking about. So it's a multi-phase issue that has to be considered, and it's going to be a difficult one given our circumstances with finances in the state.
So I think if I may be so bold to, because I think that what we're talking about here is that we're going to all hopefully come together and continue this conversation. I think one of the parties that we need to have at the table is the Department of Health. I think Doctor has alluded to the fact that there was a point in time where, as a country, we attempted to have people released basically from mental institutions for mass commitment. And I think in doing so, we legislated here in New Jersey, or by case law, legislated certain criteria that now the Department of Health now needs to deal with when they're talking about providing services. So maybe it's a limit on how long someone can receive treatment, and that's 30 days. Maybe insurance won't pay for more than that. And I think we need to realistically deal with that situation, that we might have somebody who needs treatment for longer or who doesn't have insurance. If we're going to, whether it's a mental health court or it's a mental health diversionary program, the benefit of us working with Bridgeway is they have separate grant money through their Justice Involved Services that allows them to expand the types of service and the length of service that they can provide to correspond with our program. Obviously, they have to work within their own regulations, but they can do that because they're also receiving funding from somewhere other than DOH that has very strict regulations on them. And I think that's one of the barriers that we are going to have to deal with. I think it's a barrier we can deal with, but I think they definitely need to be at the table to help suggest how we get around some of those rules. And some of them are maybe legislated rules or case law rules, and some of them are insurance rules that we're going to have to deal with. I think everyone has alluded that there has been a shift at the AOC. I think I sit on several committees, Carl and I sit on several committees. I think their attitude has changed. And so while I think, and I understand that the legislation is going to change because all of these people are going to help, but I think what it sounds like was it's an answer to a judiciary problem. I'm not sure we have that judiciary problem anymore. I think we're going to have the people at the table. You have them here. I think that there are others around the state that are going to be there. But I think we also need to deal with the struggle between the mental health system and the corresponding needs of the judiciary with a program like this. And I just wanted to put out there, I know Mr. Krakora said that Union County and Essex are the only counties that they know. My counterparts throughout the state would be very upset to hear that. So there actually are several other diversionary programs throughout the state. So I think you have partners around the state. Unfortunately, not in all 21 counties, but Ocean County, Sussex, Warren, Morris, Hunterdon, all have programs. They might look different, but we all have the same mission and the same goal. So I think you have support around the state to develop something. And so I think we just need to get everybody at the same place, and that is going to be money. I think money gets people to the place they need to be. So I'm very happy that we are having this conversation. But I do think you probably have a sympathetic and empathetic and supportive ear at the AOC. And as you can see, you have it in prosecutors.
Yeah, and you raise a great point, and one of the folks we will bring into this group, the best person to deal with the Department of Health, is Senator Joe Vitale, who's been a great advocate on health issues, and he's a very forceful legislator, and we'll bring him into the process. And the judiciary wants us to help them. They need our support by legislation to give them the guidance. So those are all good points, well taken.
So our panel's fabulous and obviously, super informed, super important to this conversation, but we do want to give an opportunity for some other people to ask questions and maybe to make comment, maybe to make some contribution to the senator's ideas. So we've got a couple people going around with the handheld mic and get my attention, and feel free to talk to the panelists or whomever.
It's on. Okay, awesome. Thank you all for coming. First and foremost, my name's Brittany. I study a master's of social work on the policy practice track at Columbia. And right now I'm going on my second year interning at the Renew Court, the Reentry Federal Court in Newark. Myself and Chris here co-authored an article about amendments to the law, and I'm hearing a lot of conversation about the severity of the crime and what can qualify you for the mental health court, and I wholeheartedly agree. What I'm not hearing, and I'd like to hear opinions on, is as the bill is written right now, it's only including Access 1 mental illnesses, which include like anxiety, depression, schizophrenia. It doesn't touch on at all, and is not inclusive at all, to co-occurring disorders, people who are neurodivergent, people who have TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, and commit crimes after the fact of that. So I wanted to raise the question as to how these might be included in the policy, and what everybody's and our varying expertise think about how we can make this more inclusive in that front as well. Thank you.
My recollection of the statute is that it does, because it addresses mental illness and mental disability, which is a very broad term and would include TBI or other brain disorders.
And neurocognitive disorders as a result of brain injury are Axis 1 disorders. So you can have major cognitive disorder as a result of a traumatic brain injury. So I would think if Axis 1 disorders are the criteria, that brain injury or other neurodivergent conditions would fall under that. So dementias, intellectual disabilities should fall under that Axis 1 as well.
And there are many states that do limit to Axis 1, but the language of this particular draft doesn't mention Axis 1. It says mental illness and mental disability. So it's very broad.
The way these services and the courts are operating, certainly in Union County, a person with a mental health condition and also a co-occurring substance use disorder condition is eligible and does receive these services.
I just wanted to point out to everyone that Ms. Macaluso was the co-author of the Star Ledger op-ed that was published a couple of days ago. I think it was emailed out to everyone who registered, and so she's obviously some. Oh, and Chris is the other co-author, so we have both of them here, which is really fantastic, and I think will help kind of galvanize some question around that too. Who else has a question?
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Stone. I'm a MSW as well from Fordham. I'm a licensed therapist and a substance abuse counselor down in Ocean County, and I do in-home family therapy on the weekends up here. Oh, in Middlesex County. I live in Woodbridge. You guys have been talking a lot about EMS, paramedics, law enforcement on that initial scene. One of the things that I found over the last few years is I'm also a volunteer EMT as well as an EMS educator. One of the things I ran into initially was talking to people at OEMS, Office of Emergency Services, through the Department of Health, in increasing the EMT training for mental health emergencies. Realistically, it's a 5-minute cursory thing. People are crazy, wait for the cops. That's literally what our EMTs are trained. People are crazy, wait for the cops. When I tried to reach out to OEMS to increase the level of training for our initial EMT program, nobody cared. I can give you specific names. At the time, Scott Phelps was the director of OEMS. Never able to get him on the phone, but all his people beneath him, it met with nothing. And I think until you address that, you're going to always be dependent upon your law enforcement officers to be the initial treatment providers on the scene and in a crisis situation.
It goes way beyond that. But with CIT, Crisis Intervention Team training, we welcome EMTs in the class. It is not limited to law enforcement. The majority of the attendees in the class are law enforcement. It's usually 2/3 law enforcement, 1/3 mental health professionals, but we also invite firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, anyone who is a first responder, because the program is to train so that you're not doing that arrest in the first place, or that mental health call doesn't become a criminal call. We're teaching law enforcement to identify behaviors and learn how to respond to those behaviors and de-escalate so that we never have the arrest in the first place. They're not even in the criminal justice system. It's not just training for the EMTs. There's a lot of conflict between EMTs and law enforcement and screeners at the scene on who's legally responsible to transport. And so there is, I agree with you 100%, there is significant amount of education that needs to be done for EMTs, paramedics, ambulance drivers, and it can be done in one of two ways. They could be, the word could be spread that they are welcome to come to CIT classes. 20 of our 21 counties have active CIT programs. Union County, we are holding our 30th class right now. We've been doing it, this is our 11th year. We have, tomorrow when we graduate the class, we will have had over 850 officers and mental health professionals through the program. It has completely changed those first responders. So yes, number one, EMTs should be encouraged to come to the 40-hour program. But we can put together, I should step back, the state, CIT New Jersey, can put together a 1 or a 2-day program for EMTs and for ambulance drivers. Signs and symptoms of mental illness, understanding the screening law and who has a legal obligation to transport. We have had EMTs saying, oh, I'm not taking him to the hospital, that's kidnapping, he doesn't want to go, when you've got law enforcement or have a screener with a certificate that mandates transport. So that is definitely something that is lacking. And that's a simple fix. That's education that can take a half a day, a full day, and cost nothing.
And I agree with Maureen, and I think one of the other things we can do, and something that many counties are looking into, Union County being one of them, is sort of going around the mountain. So looking at co-responder programs, so programs in which there is a mental health call, and while that call goes into 911 and it goes to a police officer, to having mental health professionals who can work with that officer so the person doesn't meet screening criteria or doesn't need a screener, but does need mental health services, to have a mental health professional who can respond with the law enforcement officer so that they can provide services right there and maybe help negotiate some of those conversations if it is an EMT that needs to respond, so that it's not a fight between law enforcement and the EMT, but it's a mental health professional and the EMT saying this person needs to go because we need them to go to the hospital. Our screeners do a great job of that, but having another mental health professional there also helps, and several counties are exploring those options as well.
And this idea has been around for over 10 years because Trinitas and Linden Police Department applied for a grant 12 years ago with the idea of having a mental health professional, even a screener, stationed at Linden Police Department, so they can, not only do they respond initially to that crisis call, but that the police and the mental health worker can go out a few days later to check in, to make sure the person is engaged in services and they're not falling off the tracks. Because most individuals who are brought to the hospital are not admitted. They're given follow-up appointments. And so who's going to check on them? Who's going to make sure they go? And if you could have a CIT officer and a mental health professional doing those kind of follow-ups, we could hopefully keep people engaged in services. And we break down barriers between the community and law enforcement. Look, that's a whole other topic of conversation, but when police are seen as approachable, as somebody there to help, the community is more likely to call them when things are starting to go bad, as opposed to waiting until it's already off the rails.
Yeah, I want to add one other thing too. One of the areas that we're not really paying much attention to when we talk about the mental illness are the developmental problems of children and autism. I know when I was prosecutor, the rate in New Jersey was phenomenally high for newborn. It was something like 1 out of every 32. Now, recently, in a poll in 2019, it was 1 out of every 39 preschoolers in New Jersey suffer from autism. And at one point in time, we had training for all the police departments in the state of New Jersey in 2012 and in 2013. We had them in Union County, and then in Bergen County, they were split up. But we had every police department that was trained by a fellow named Dennis Dubat from Florida, who's the guru on teaching police officers about autism. I think this is an area that we definitely should be considering when we're talking about mental illness. A lot of these kids, young people, and I'm not just talking about, children who are 4 and 5 who wander off and go into a lake because they love water. I'm talking about kids who are maybe 15, 16, 17 years old. They don't realize that some of the things they're doing are offensive to police officers, like grabbing their badge. And the police officer assumes that they're assaulting them. They're not. There are those kind of events that occur. We have to teach our police officers about that. But we also have to understand that people with autism, adults, should also be considered when we're talking about legislation for diversion, mental health courts. It's important, and we're not doing that. So that's one point I think that has been ignored essentially over the last few years.
All right, I've got a question here that was submitted on Facebook. This is from Patricia Coleman. She says, my son, now 32, suffers from mental illness and is currently incarcerated in Northern State Prison. Prayerfully, he'll be released in December. The prison staff are doing nothing to help with his issues. He is not on the right medication, and they do not offer any counseling. He suffers from schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. My son found his father in bed. He apparently had a heart attack. My son was on probation at the time and self-medicated. They locked him up for violation of probation. So there's 2 questions here. One, what is available now for Ms. Coleman's son to seek mental health treatment while he's in prison? And 2, If mental health courts are established in New Jersey, how will they help treat people that are in the same place as Ms. Coleman's son?
Let me address the first issue, and it's another issue that's really, really dear to my heart, and something that I've been trying to get done through our criminal justice system, our Department of Corrections. There are going to be folks in prison. There are plenty of folks. I mean, I understand the statistics may be almost 50% of prisoners have mental health issues, and they're absolutely not getting the treatment that they need, and they wound up getting out and going back and committing crimes. So that's going to be another issue that we have to and we will address. What's the second question, Sarah?
All right, so the second question on here is, if mental health courts are established, how will they treat people in the same place as Ms. Coleman's son? So basically, at what point in the story would they help intervene, and how would they help him from going through what he's going through right now?
Yeah, I have that question also, Ted, maybe. Are mental health courts empowered, or should they probably should be empowered to provide to impose incarceration, but also include a treatment plan to be implemented while the offender is in prison?
Yeah, first of all, there are different mental health courts with different positions about when you can apply to that court. Some you can only do it at the time of booking, some before indictment, some you can do it at any stage of the proceeding. I think Florida, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, aren't they permitted to apply, a defendant through his attorney, permitted to apply for mental health court involvement at any stage? Am I incorrect?
Yeah, they do it as early as possible. Absolutely, that's true. Yeah.
You try to do it, but the bottom line is, once you're in the incarcerated, you're out of the jurisdiction of a mental health court.
Well, that was my question. The mental health court has no, like the drug court, loses jurisdiction when the person has to serve some time. It's in lieu of imprisonment totally.
Well, I don't think he can. He's a superior court if he's in jail.
Gotcha.
So there can be other applications, post-conviction relief, appeal, but I think the mental health aspect is gone.
Okay, so that would correspond to the answer to the first question, is that we also have to amp up treatment in prison for folks with mental health illnesses.
I think one thing you should consider, first of all, I think it should be expanded to situations that are violent. We've heard about it, all sorts of positions on this, but even the Brooklyn court in 2004 expanded to have certain individuals who are charged with violent crimes accepted into the court. I don't think we should reject it out of hand.
I amended the drug court law.
I know.
The guy who was standing over my bed and said, shoot him, because he didn't qualify because he had a second-degree prior. So I amended that because, you have to give the judicial and the prosecutorial discretion to do the right job no matter what the circumstances.
And you're pointing out something which is important, Senator, and I think Mr. Crecora and Prosecutor Daniel both have to be involved in this process. The prosecutors, the public defenders, the defense bar have to appear before the legislature to give them their positions, to discuss these kinds of issues openly. You just can't write a law and say, this is the law. There's... I think the Supreme Court has ruled on some of those.
Just to follow up, I know in the area of drug court, the Drug Court Reform Act was passed in 1986, and it took many, many years now to get drug court treatment programs in place within the prison system. I think just recently, like I said, I just came over from the bench 3 months ago, but before that I was in criminal courts for years, in the criminal court system here in Union County. And I just remember recently the correction system implemented drug court treatment programs primarily available in Mid-State Correctional Facility, I think, the old Fort Dix. And there now these people who can't get into drug court because of the nature of their offenses, violent, whatever, they're disqualified. They can't get into drug court, so they're in prison. But there are programs now in this prison, I still go back to Mid-State, where people can get this treatment, whether it's long-term inpatient, short-term inpatient, outpatient, the functional equivalent of what they would be able to get if they were not sentenced to prison. And hopefully, this mental health program will one day provide for treatment within the four walls of a prison for those like this person who asked the question here this evening. I mean, it's on point, and it's, hopefully one day that'll be there.
And I think to that point, if hopefully as part of this program, there will be some form of evaluation that follows this individual. So if they do end up in a state prison, the evaluation can follow, and then the receiving agency, or here in New Jersey, Craft, can receive that information and already know ahead of time that they are receiving someone who has a mental illness, needs certain types of treatment, and they are, whether it's a specific location or prison, or even within one of our prisons here in New Jersey, that medical staff is aware of what treatment this person has received, what treatment needs they have, what medications they're on, what medications have been working, so that they are at least received in the prison system in a way that they can continue to advance their treatment and to have a successful treatment, even if they are within the prison system. And I do think that that is something that, depending on how the system is set up and how the evaluations are set up, while we can't have complete influence over the parole system, we can have some input into what treatment that person is receiving in the jail.
Well, that was exactly my point, and I suspect that is not being done at the current time. Is that a fair assessment, Judge?
Can I address this?
Why not?
What I was talking about, it was
Let's hear from the
implemented
judge.
under the Christie administration. It goes back to the Christie administration, the passage of the legislation that allowed for the funding for the programs within the Mid-State Correctional Facility. Maureen?
I think.
When
Go ahead. Go ahead, Maureen.
When inmates are received at state prison, they first go to CRAFT, the Central Reception and Assignment Facility. They're usually there for 30 days, and they have a medical evaluation, a psychiatric and or psychological, and their criminal histories are checked out, and they determine which institution the person should go to. Northern State, Southwoods, and Trenton all have psychiatric wings. Their functions are a little different, and the severity. But what I used to do, and I'm sure Tiffany continues, is when I had somebody who was not eligible for jail diversion and was going to state prison, but we had psychiatric records, because perhaps I worked with the public defender's office and we were looking at a potential insanity or diminished capacity, or they wanted to provide the psychiatric records for a lesser sentence. As we would copy all of those documents and deliver them to CRAFT so that when the inmate got there, they had all of those psychiatric records so that they could make an educated decision on which facility to send the person to. I'm sure that process needs to be improved, but there is something in place. If they don't have the records, people fall through the cracks.
Well, I
But
mean, yeah,
that could be
and
required as part of the pre-sentence report that goes to the prison.
but it still has to be implemented.
Yes.
Just like my Earn Your Way Out program, it still has to be implemented. So, and it obviously was not implemented in the case of the questioner's son.
Yeah, and let me just say, that story from that mom, that's a common story that we hear in the public defender's office, constantly, families of incarcerated former clients who have serious mental health problems or drug addiction problems and are just not getting any treatment, and of course the family's concerned, and there's really nothing we can do about that, because once the clients are in the custody Department of Corrections, they really are stuck with whatever there is or is not offered by way of treatment in the prisons. So it is an area, I agree with you, Senator, that needs.
Something that you can do with it, can't do with it, but it's something the government, the legislature should do.
They can, and even probation, because a simple fix of adding all of those psychiatric records to the pre-sentence report that goes to the institution would at least be a start, because if the person doesn't self-identify or admit they have a mental illness, at least if the records go, the institution is on notice. Correct. And that's not happening in many, many cases.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Rojas. I currently am a forensic case manager in New York, Manhattan, Cran, Community Reentry Services. And a lot of what we do, and myself as a new forensic case worker, is that I work with clients from Rikers Island that have been incarcerated, either few months, years, that did accept services from us. This is voluntary services that we work with the attorneys, we work with the social workers at Rikers Island, and we see if they want these services and if they are eligible. If they're eligible, they have to have a serious mental illness. So I have a lot of clients that schizophrenia, PTSD, and what we do with them is that as they are going to be coming out and released, we work with them. We work to have those medications, making sure those medications are being prescribed, or if it's something that it's not working for them, we talk with their social worker and with the facility as well. We also do video conferencing with them because of the pandemic right now. So we do video conferencing with them. We ask them how they're doing. We try to get that one-on-one interaction with them. And it's so important to remember that these are human beings just like ourselves, which is why we need to have that one-on-one interaction. These are people that do have severe mental illnesses, and that's something that has worked for our nonprofit organization. And as they are being released, not always will they go back to their parole officer. We try to, we do outreach. We make sure they are connected to the services that they are referred to by their social worker, as well as CRAN. And we try to connect them before they are, released, so that they have a secure place in the community. If we need to contact the emergency contacts to make sure that they are there, because it's so hard to do that once they're released. After they're released, they may not be on medication, they may just disappear, they may go MIA, and that's an issue that we also have time to time. But a lot of the times we do have successful stories where they do go back to their higher level of cares, or they go into a different type of facility for housing, or if they have different types of medical illnesses, we'll find a treatment center that will provide them. But it's the connection and the communication that is so important.
Did anyone have any final thoughts they want to share before I hand it back to the senator? Senator Lesniak.
So first, let me thank everyone here. As I said, Tom Moran couldn't get through, the editor of the Star Ledger, NJ Advanced Media Technology got in the way, but he was very much interested in this. And this is just, as I've said this over and over, this is the beginning of a journey. And with everyone's help, we're going to have a big success at the end of the journey. And I want to thank you all for contributing, and I'm sure you're going to contribute from now on. And Sarah, do you have some folks to thank? Oh, and by the way, Dr. Montrose is available to autograph the books that you each have after the forum is over.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you to our staff for putting on this amazing forum, to Lily, who is our new social media and PR manager, to Brennan over here, who's our intern, to our lovely volunteers, Amanda, Kevin, Devin, who is out there, and also to Sam. Sam just joined our team this week, and she's doing a fantastic job. I want to thank all of the people who have made this event possible, like AVT over here, Ian, who's taking pictures of me, the video people out there, and just all of you guys for being here to be part of this really important conversation. Something that is so important to the Lesniak Institute is that we go past awareness. We really want to drive action with this, so we are going to be following up with all of you to get your feedback, to talk about all of these changes that we've discussed tonight, to make it real. And of the people who've left early, they've come up to me and said, Sarah, this is great. We have to do more. We have to make this happen. So I know this is going to happen, and so I just want to thank all of you for being here to be a part of this. I hope you get home safely, and I also hope you buy Dr. Montrose's book and get it signed. So thank you.
Well, and how about another round of applause for Sarah for pulling this all together? Jonathan, you want to finish it up?
I just wanted to make sure Sarah got her thanks. So otherwise, again, a thank you to the panelists for your time, for your expertise. It sounds like it's not the last you're going to hear from us or the senator, but this is really important work. I'm so proud to have been here with you to make the case for this legislation, to begin to get the ideas going for how to improve this legislation, to learn from our past practices, to learn from what other states and areas have done, to learn from the expertise of these people who are really on the front lines in dealing with these people that are suffering from mental health, and then all of the other pieces around it. I totally agree that we've turned a corner, I think, in many ways here in New Jersey in terms of making these kinds of resources available, and really excited by the senator's enthusiasm and everyone's enthusiasm. So get home safe, be well, and thanks everyone.
Give yourselves a big hand.